My daughter-in-law Renee never came to my son Darnell's funeral. Hours later, while my friends were still bringing by casseroles, she posted a picture drinking in Cancun. She was with the gardener. The caption said, "Enjoy life while you can." I was sunk in my old armchair, eyes fixed on that photo, when my phone buzzed. A text from a number I didn't recognize. I tapped it open and went cold. It was from Darnell. "Dad, come to my house now." The name's Curtis. 72 years old, and what I'm about to lay out is the story of how I put an empty casket in the ground to expose a killer. I walked up and stood before that polished walnut casket, heavy, costly, and not a soul inside it. Curtis is who I am, a 72-year-old African-American man. Welcome to Honor Revenge Stories, where the truth has a way of finding its own justice. Before we get into today's story, if these stories speak to you, tap subscribe, so the next one comes straight to you. And I'd love to hear from you before you even finish. Whose side are you already on, Curtis or Darnell? And what is it about them that caught your attention first? Drop it in the comments. Now, a quick note, some elements of this story have been dramatized for the telling, and any resemblance to specific real individuals or events is coincidental. It's the truth underneath that matters. That day I was laying my only son Darnell to rest, or at least the idea of him. What pressed down on my chest wasn't grief, it was ice. A cold, deliberate fury that had burrowed deep into my bones. A feeling I hadn't carried since I was a young man trying to survive on the streets of Baltimore. I had to keep myself together. I had to play my role. The church was packed, the air heavy with the smell of white carnations and the sound of quiet weeping. Every one of them had come for me for the mourning father. If they only knew. If they only knew I wasn't mourning at all. I was getting ready for war. This was our church, Sharp Street Memorial United Methodist Church. The same one where Darnell had been baptized. The same one where I laid my beloved wife Evelyn to rest 10 years ago. Every pew was filled with my community, the people who watched me build a logistics company from a single rusted-out truck into a whole fleet. The people who figured I was just a comfortable retiree now. They didn't know what was real. They didn't know that when I sold that company, I didn't just step away. I became wealthy, $50 million wealthy, but nothing changed about me. I stayed in my small brick house on the west side. I drove the same Chevy truck. I wore the same plain suits to Sunday service. I wanted Darnell to understand the worth of hard work, not lean on an inheritance like a crutch. And he had learned that. He was a good man. But my silence, my modesty had left a door open. It had let a predator walk into our lives. And that predator was my daughter-in-law, Renee, Darnell. My son hadn't died from some sudden heart defect, the way the false death certificate claimed. He was out of sight waiting, and I was here playing the part of the shattered old man. I looked toward the front pew, the seat set aside for the grieving widow, empty. My daughter-in-law Renee was nowhere to be found. Her wealthy white parents from Guilford were not there either. Their absence rang out like a shout through that silent church. It was a flag planted in victory. It was the deepest disrespect I had ever witnessed in my life. This was no simple oversight. This was a deliberate, calculated act of public contempt. She wanted everyone in that building to understand she was finished. Done with our family, done with our traditions, done with any pretense of sorrow. She was already celebrating. Even as I stood there, my phone was vibrating against my ribs. I just knew it was the alert I'd been waiting on. The alert from the private investigator I had hired to keep tabs on her. But I couldn't look, not yet. The performance had to be seen through. Pastor Alvin, a decent man who knew nothing of what was really happening, placed a steady hand on my shoulder. "Curtis," he said, his voice thick, "they are not here. This is a shame upon her house." I gave a slow nod. "The shame belongs to her pastor, not to me. Let us proceed. We are gathered here." The pastor began, his voice carrying across the room, "to mourn the sudden loss of Darnell." I let the words fall past me. I focused on the plan. I focused on the footage I had reviewed the night before. The video of Renee and that gardener Gareth laughing together. The video of her slipping poison into Darnell's morning coffee while she thought he was away on business. "Dad, she tried to kill me." His voice had been shaking over the phone. My reply had come out flat and cold. "I know, son. Now we let her believe she pulled it off." The pastor called out my name. "Curtis, would you care to say a few words?" I rose to my feet. My old legs held firm. I walked to the pulpit and looked out across a sea of familiar faces, my friends, my neighbors. They saw a broken old man up there. They They were about to watch a king defend his throne. "My son, Darnell." I began, voice steady and clear, believed in loyalty. I let a beat of silence pass. He believed a promise was binding, that marriage was something sacred, that family was a fortress, not a snare. Heads began to nod, people assuming a standard eulogy was unfolding. But betrayal. I went on, letting my gaze fall on that bare front pew. Is a cancer. It begins quietly, a small lie, a hidden debt, a stolen glance. And it spreads until there's nothing left. When the service wound down, the condolence line formed and moved slowly past me. Mrs. Calderon, my neighbor of 40 years, seized my hand in both of hers, trembling with barely contained fury. "Curtis, that woman has no soul," she whispered sharply. "To not even show her face after everything you and Darnell gave her." My mind drifted back to the first afternoon Darnell brought her home. My little brick house, the one Evelyn and I had built our whole lives inside. Renee had walked through the door, and I caught her nose wrinkle just slightly. "It's cozy," she'd said, her eyes moving across my worn furniture and old family photos, as though they were things left at a curb. She never recognized the value. She only ever calculated the price. And she had decided long before that I was nothing worth considering. She was about to learn how costly that miscalculation truly was. I walked back inside my house, but it didn't feel like home anymore. It was just a still hollow box soaked in the suffocating scent of funeral flowers. The quiet was heavier than any hymn we'd sung that morning. I sank down into my old armchair, the fabric worn smooth by 45 years of marriage. The same chair where I had held a baby Darnell against my chest. That cold, hard anger from the church, the block of ice sitting low in my gut, hadn't moved. But now, a creeping confusion was working its way in. Why was Renee being this brazen? Why grind our faces in it? Missing the funeral was a monstrous thing on its own, but her entire wealthy family going dark alongside her, that didn't add up. It felt careless. It felt arrogant. It was the arrogance of someone absolutely certain they've already won. Someone who believes the game ended and now they're just collecting what's owed them. She hadn't simply disrespected Darnell's memory. She was spitting on it. I stared at the wall of family photographs. Darnell grinning under his graduation cap. Me and my late Evelyn on our wedding day, and then a newer one, Darnell and Renee on theirs. Her smile looked so wide, so real. What a fool I had been. What a blind old fool. My phone buzzed on the side table. I left it alone. It buzzed again, insistent, almost angry. I picked it up, expecting another round of condolences from someone at church. It was a text from my niece Portia. Sharp kid, works in tech downtown, doesn't let anything slip past her. The message simply read, "Uncle Curtis, I am so sorry. You need to see this." There was a screenshot attached. My thumb, rough and thick from a lifetime of labor, fumbled to pull it open. The screen lit up and the breath went right out of me. It landed like a second punch, sharper than the first, hitting harder than even the news of Darnell's death. It was an Instagram post. Renee. She had on a coral red bikini, barely there. She was laughing with her head thrown back, sunglasses pushed up into her perfectly kept blonde hair. A pristine beach behind her, white sand water, so blue it couldn't look real. She was hoisting a bright blue cocktail, a piña colada with a little paper umbrella in it. And she wasn't by herself. She was clinking glasses with Gareth, the gardener. The man she'd brought on 6 months back, claiming the yard had gotten too much for Darnell to keep up with. Gareth's arm was looped tight around her waist, his hand resting just above her hip. His grin was wide and predatory, but the photograph wasn't even the worst of it. It was the caption, 6 words she had typed out for the whole world to read. "Enjoy life while you can." Then the timestamp. Posted 1 hour ago. 1 hour. Right in the middle of her husband's eulogy. While Pastor Alvin was speaking of eternal rest and the grace of the Lord, she was posting about tropical drinks. While I stood at that pulpit staring at an empty front pew, she was out there celebrating with her lover. The confusion dissolved instantly. The ice in my gut didn't thaw. It fractured into 1,000 sharp points. This wasn't arrogance. This was a victory lap. She was dancing on my son's grave. She thought she was free. Free from Darnell, free from me. She thought she was rich. She believed the inheritance was already hers, that the old man in the plain suit was just an obstacle she'd gotten past. She had no idea. She had no idea what she had just set in motion. She had no idea who she was truly up against. I was about to close out of my phone. I was about to call my attorney, the one who handles the real estate, the $50 million estate she knew nothing existed. I was on the verge of starting the war. But then the phone shook in my hand one more time. Another text message. I looked at the name on the screen, and my heart, my old, worn, furious heart, stopped cold. It wasn't Portia. It wasn't Mrs. Calderon. It was Darnell. It was my son. My dead son. I couldn't pull in a breath. My fingers were shaking so badly I nearly fumbled the phone to the floor. This was sick. This had to be Renee. Some twisted game played from his phone to cut me even deeper. Had she taken it before she flew off to Cancun? Was she firing off texts from that beach laughing it up with Gareth? I held my breath, thumb hovering over the notification. I had to know. I opened the message. It wasn't long, just 6 words. 6 words that rearranged everything. Dad, come to my house now. Back door alone. I read it once, then, twice, then, a third time. This wasn't Renee's phrasing, wasn't Gareth's either. The way it was written, that was him. Back door, alone, stripped down, no flourish. Military precision. That was Darnell. A flood of possibilities, each one wilder than the one before. It crashed through my mind. Was this a setup? Had they already come back from Cancun, waiting to finish what she'd started? Or was it possible? Was there a reason that casket was empty that I hadn't even considered? I got up, grabbed my keys off the hook near the door. Didn't matter if it was a trap. Didn't matter what I was walking into. I needed to know. I drove my old Chevy Silverado out into the night. The engine has a rattle I've lived with for 15 years, a sound that usually settles me. Tonight, it just sounded loud and intrusive. I left behind the familiar brick and vinyl siding of the west side and drove east toward Guilford, her territory, Renee's world. A world of 3-car garages, vast lawns trimmed to geometric perfection, and hushed, flawless streets where my old truck stuck out like something the wind had blown in from another zip code. I never belonged here. Darnell knew that. He had always offered to meet at my place or at some diner halfway between us. But this text was clear. Come to my house. His house. The one she had chosen. The one I had quietly covered the enormous down payment on something I never told him, routing the money through a first-time buyer grant run by my private foundation. I parked 3 blocks away beneath a wide oak tree, tucking the truck into the deep shadow. No point in giving some nosy neighbor a reason to call private security. I walked the rest, the cold November air gnawing at my face. I felt every one of my 72 years in my joints. I slipped into the manicured side yard, past her prize-winning arrogant hydrangea bushes, and made it to the back door. My heart wasn't just pounding, it was hammering against my ribs, a desperate rhythm I couldn't slow down. Trap or miracle, trap or miracle. I worked the spare key Darnell had given me years ago into the lock. It turned. I pushed the door open. The sharp smell of expensive cleaning products and fresh paint filled my nose. The kitchen was dark, washed only in the cold blue glow of the microwave clock. There was a shape at the island. I flinched my hand, instinctively dropping to the heavy flashlight I carry in my coat pocket. The shape moved. Dad. The voice was his. It was Darnell. Not dead, not a ghost. Sitting at the kitchen island in a dark sweatsuit. His face was pale and hollowed out, but unmistakably impossibly alive. I leaned against the doorframe, my legs emptying of strength like water through a cracked cup. All of it, the anger, the confusion, the hard, frozen rage I'd gripped through that entire church service cracked open at once. For 1 second, a wave of crushing relief rolled over me and nearly took me off my feet. You... I started, but it came out as a rough bark. The rest wouldn't form. He looked terrible, dark hollows under his eyes, and he'd clearly shed 20 pounds since I'd truly looked at him. But his chest was rising and falling. He was here. He gestured to the stool across from him. "Sit down, Dad," he said. Quiet but with an edge I had never heard from him before. "We need to talk, and you need to listen." I climbed onto the tall stool. The marble countertop was ice cold under my hands. The funeral, I managed. The casket was empty, he said, holding my gaze steady. It was part of a plan, my plan, because she tried to kill me. Those words just sat there in the still sterile kitchen. Kill you. I said it not as a question, but as confirmation the ugly thing that had been lodged in my gut since I first saw that photo from Cancun. He gave a slow nod. It started about 6 months ago, right after I told her I wasn't going to leave my job to manage her family's money, which is what she'd suddenly started pushing for. I began feeling off, just worn down. A deep bone-heavy exhaustion that sleep did nothing to fix. He dragged a hand across his face, and I could see how much had been stripped from him. Then the dizziness hit. I'd be in a meeting mid-sentence walking through a project, and the room would just start to spin. I'd have to grab the table edge just to stay on my feet. Then my heart started going racing out of nowhere, hammering like I'd just sprinted a mile, even when I was sitting still with a book in my lap. I remembered him telling me he was burned out. I'd told him to slow down, maybe get away somewhere. I figured it was job stress, the weight of that mortgage. I went to the doctor, he continued. My regular guy. He ran everything, blood panel, EKG, stress test. Told me I was in perfect shape for a 45-year-old man. Said it was anxiety. Wrote me a prescription for it. I tightened my grip on the cold marble. Did you take them? A few times? Darnell said, shaking his head. But they only made things worse. Foggier, weaker. I stopped. But the symptoms kept climbing, Dad. Every single morning, I'd wake up feeling like the worst flu of my life, my hands trembling so badly I couldn't hold a pen. I dropped a full cup of coffee last week, right here on this floor. He looked down at the clean tile. And Renee, she was so attentive, so worried. She'd rub my shoulders, tell me I was pushing myself too hard. She'd bring me vitamins, glasses of water, and she always made my coffee in the morning. You just sit down, baby, she'd say. I'll take care of you. Let me handle everything. He leaned in, eyes burning with an intensity I hadn't seen from him since he was young and fired up at my dinner table over politics. That was it, Dad. The coffee? It took me 6 months to see what was right in front of me. So simple, so obvious, I walked right past it. He paused, steadied himself. 4 days ago, I woke up early. Had a 6 a.m. flight to Charlotte I had to catch. I was running behind. Alarm hadn't gone off. No time for coffee. I grabbed a water bottle out of the fridge and ran out the door. By the time I landed at Hartsfield-Jackson, I felt fine. I felt like myself for the first time in months. The fog had lifted. My hands were still. He pushed up from the island and started moving through the kitchen, lit up now by the memory of that clarity. All day in Charlotte, I felt strong, felt like me again. And the whole time, one thought was eating me alive. A terrible thought. It was the coffee. I knew it. I just knew it. The only times I felt my heart slam, the only times the room spun, it was after that coffee. The coffee Renee made for me every morning. Darnell didn't just tell me. He showed me. He rose from the island, hands trembling slightly, not from weakness anymore, but from a cold, focused fury I recognized in my bones. It was my own fury looking back at me. I told Renee I had another trip, he said. Voice dropped low. An emergency meeting in Seattle, 3 days. She was so helpful. She even packed my bag. He crossed into the living room, toward the massive flat screen mounted on the wall, an oversized thing I'd always thought was absurd for that space. Now I understood what it was. A screen for a private reckoning. The flight was supposed to leave yesterday morning, Darnell went on. But I never went near the airport. I held back, waited until she'd left for her yoga class, then slipped back in. And I installed this. He pointed to a spot just above the built-in espresso machine. I looked hard, saw nothing. It's a micro camera, Dad. The kind they use in intelligence ops. Cost me $800. Best money I ever spent. He pulled out his phone and brought up the app. The television blinked on. She believed I was 3,000 miles away, but I was in a hotel room 5 blocks from here watching my own kitchen, watching my wife. He pressed play. You need to see this, Dad. You need to see exactly who she is. What filled that screen was his own kitchen, the very room we stood in, captured from a ceiling-mounted angle looking straight down at everything. The timestamp burned into the corner, yesterday afternoon, 2:15 p.m. Nothing stirred at first. The kitchen sat empty. Then the back door pushed open. Renee came through it. Yoga pants, tank top, her blonde hair tied back off her face. She had the glow of someone who'd just finished a workout and felt good about it. A wireless earbud in one earphone in hand mid-conversation. And she was laughing. That laugh, breezy, almost girlish, was one I'd never warmed to. Oh, stop it, she breathed into the air. He's gone. I told you he's completely clueless. Then silence while she listened. She drifted to the refrigerator, grabbed a bottle of sparkling water. Yes, baby, just a few more days. The doctor said his heart is already weak. It's just taking longer than we thought. My hands found the back of the sofa and held on. I glanced at Darnell. His face had turned to granite. He didn't blink, didn't move, just kept his eyes nailed to that screen. Then the back door opened a second time, and in walked Gareth, the gardener. Jeans and a snug t-shirt, nothing resembling the clothes he wore on the job. Renee's expression didn't flicker with any surprise at all. She wrapped up the call without ceremony. "He's here," she said, and dropped the phone. Gareth moved straight to her, no hesitation, hands going to her waist, drawing her body against his. What followed wasn't a quick kiss. It was slow and deep and deliberate, the kind that carries the full weight of a secret shared between two people who've been waiting. Something lurched in my gut. I had watched this same man pushing a mower across my son's lawn. I had poured him something cold to drink on a blazing afternoon. Darnell folded his arms across his chest, knuckles draining of color. "So, he's gone?" Gareth's voice carried a roughness I didn't recall. "For 3 days." Renee said, her lips still curled in a smile. "Seattle." Gareth let out a short laugh. "Perfect. And the old man?" "Grieving?" Renee said, eyes rolling toward the ceiling. "Sitting alone in that dusty house of his, probably staring at some photograph of his dead wife. When Darnell's gone, he'll fall apart completely. He'll be too wrecked to read a single page of paperwork." "You're certain?" Gareth pressed. "Completely," Renee said. "He'll hand everything over without a fight, just a grieving old man handing it to his son's grieving widow. Sentimental and stupid. You couldn't ask for a better combination." Gareth ran a hand slowly through her hair. "What about the money? You're sure what the old man has flows through Darnell?" "Without question," Renee said, her voice saturated with certainty. "Darnell told me himself he's the only heir and I'm his only wife. The line runs straight. The moment Darnell is gone, everything comes to us." Gareth smiled at that. "And the old man himself, does he even matter?" Renee waved it off. "He'll be next, but we'll make that one look natural. Broken old widower loses his only child. His heart just stops. What else would it do? Neighbors and friends will shake their heads and call it sad. And we will hold everything, every deed, every dollar, all of it." Words had left me. I just kept watching. Darnell hadn't so much as shifted his weight. He was taking it in, letting every syllable land. "Well, let's hope this time it works," Gareth said. "She's found him tougher to crack than she figured." "Oh, it'll work," Renee said. Something changed in how she said it. The lightness evaporated. What came out instead was flat and cold and hard as a blade, something that made my skin pull tight. "I'm tired of waiting." She crossed the kitchen to the spice cabinet, custom-built top of the line. Her hand reached past the oregano and the thyme feeling behind the bottles. Out came a small dark glass vial, the size of something you'd use for eye drops. "This is the last of it," she said. "The specialist in Mexico said this was the real deal. No trace. It just mimics a massive cardiac event. 10 drops should be enough to finish a horse." "Well, he's not a horse," Gareth said, reeling her back toward him. "He's our golden goose," Renee murmured. Then she turned and walked to the espresso machine. She lifted the cover off the water reservoir in the back. My son, my brilliant, hard-working boy, had never once started a morning without a double espresso. She tipped the vial above the opening. 1, 2, 3. She counted each word deliberate. A 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. A smile crossed her face, small, tight, carrying nothing but pure evil. Straight into the tank. Friday morning, he walks through the door drained from the flight, and the first thing he'll reach for is his coffee. She nestled the vial back in its hiding place, shut the cabinet, and kissed Gareth one more time. "Ready for tomorrow morning," she said. Then the feed died. The massive screen went black, though the dim kitchen still floated in its surface as a ghost image. Staring back at me was my own reflection, a 72-year-old face cut from stone. Beside it, Darnell's reflection rigid as a post. The refrigerator hummed. That was the only sound in the world. I forced myself to turn and look at my son directly. He wasn't looking back at me. His gaze was still fixed on that dark screen, on the place where the woman who had just blueprinted his death had been standing. He hadn't only sat through footage of her trying to kill him, he'd watched her pull another man into his own kitchen and kiss him. He'd heard her reduce him to a golden goose. He'd heard her write me off as sentimental and stupid. He'd heard her schedule my murder like an errand on a to-do list. "Darnell," I said. Barely above a whisper, but it landed like something thrown. He turned at last. What I found in his eyes wasn't grief. It was absence. Every living thing I had worked to put there, the warmth, the gentleness had been scoured out. Her betrayal had done that, burned it clean off. "She's been poisoning me for 6 months, Dad," he said, his voice barely holding. Slowly. A small enough amount to keep me ailing, enough to chip away at my heart over time. Enough that when the final dose came, any doctor in the world would call it natural. He moved back to the island and grabbed the counter's edge with both hands, knuckles going white at the joint. Every conversation about my stress levels, every appointment, every test. She was tracking the results. She was gauging whether the damage was on schedule. He looked at me, and just for a beat, his expression cracked open. "She wanted me dead, Dad. She wanted me dead." His fist came down on the marble. Once. A hard, dead sound. "For money. Your money. And she doesn't even know the full picture of what you actually have." I closed the distance between us. My hand went to his shoulder, the same one I used to hoist him up onto when he was small enough to ride up there. "Yes, son," I said. "She did." His eyes came back into focus, the momentary fracture sealing over, replaced by the same cold calm that had been living in my chest since the night before. "What did you do, Dad?" he asked. "After the call, after I sent you that video, what did you actually set in motion about the funeral?" I looked at my son, 45 years old, hunted inside the walls of his own house. Sharp mind on him. He ran the Midwest division of a major software firm. But that world has rules. Mine never did. I had spent a lifetime waging wars on the corners of Baltimore and in the glass towers of corporate America alike. To me, this was simply the next one. "Before I get into what I did," I said, keeping my voice down, "you owe me the full reason. The money is that truly all this is..." Darnell's head moved slowly side to side, his face settling into something close to revulsion. "It goes deeper than that, Dad. This isn't just greed at work. It's a woman drowning." He laid it out for me. After the video, once there was no room left for doubt, he did what he should have done, long before forced his way into the locked drawer of her desk, where she kept her personal accounts hidden from him. No love letters in there, just final notices stacked up. "She's $200,000 in debt, Dad," he said, and I heard his voice splinter at the edges. 200 grand, gambling debts, online casinos, cards she'd opened without ever telling me. She'd been robbing Peter to pay Paul for years. She was going under. And suddenly the whole shape of it was clear to me. When a person is going under, they don't care who they take down with them, not even someone they once swore before God to cherish. "And Gareth?" I asked. "Not just the man she's sleeping with," Darnell said, biting down on the words. "He's connected. I believe he's among the people she owes money to. This was never a love affair, Dad. It was a transaction. She kills me, collects your estate, and squares the debt." "So, you saw the footage," I said, steering us back to the thread. "You knew what she was doing to you. Why not go straight to the police?" That question mattered more than any other. "Go to them with what exactly?" Darnell said, the frustration cracking through. Footage of her adding what eye drops, some vitamin supplement she'd have denied every word of it. Called me paranoid, overwhelmed, unraveling under pressure. Her word against mine, that's all it would have been. "And Dad?" He leaned toward me, voice dropping. "Say I filed for divorce instead. Then what?" Her back is against the wall. She knows the game is up. Cornered and desperate, she doesn't slow down, she accelerates, finds a faster method. I was a dead man from the moment I saw that video, Dad. There was no door-marked exit, I couldn't stay, and I couldn't run. "So you called me," I said, and the weight of that settled in my chest as I took over the story. My son, brilliant, capable, built for the world he'd made for himself, had reached the end of the board, no moves left. He'd run the position out and found nothing. What he hadn't factored in was who his father was. I don't play chess. When the table itself is crooked, I overturn the whole thing. "You called me at 10 p.m. last night," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, my hands unsteady on the phone. "You sent me that video. I told you to sit tight, lock your bedroom door, and don't touch the coffee. Not a single drop. I didn't fall apart. I didn't rage. I got focused. The second I ended that call with Darnell, I picked the phone back up. Not to reach a lawyer, not to dial the police. I called a ghost. "You remember Dr. Ruford Okafor?" I asked Darnell. He nodded slowly. Uncle Ruford. The one who used to show up every Thanksgiving. The one you served with? I figured he had retired down to Tampa. He did, I said. But Ruford and I go back longer than that. We were medics together in Nam. We hauled men out of the mud and pulled them back from places no man should return from. We've declared men dead who still had a pulse, and we've dragged men back who'd already been written off. There is nobody walking this earth I trust the way I trust him. I laid out the rest of the plan for Darnell, whose face had shifted, the terror draining away, replaced by something like stunned disbelief. I reached Ruford at his place in Tampa. I said, "Ruford, I'm calling in the marker." He didn't waste a breath deliberating. He just came back with, "What do you need, Curtis?" I told him, "I need you to sign a death certificate for my son." A long silence followed. Then all he said was, "What time's the flight?" I went on. Ruford took the red-eye. He touched down in Baltimore by 5 a.m. yesterday morning. I was at the airport myself to collect him, drove my own truck. We sat together in the dark with bad coffee between us, and I walked him through that video. He just watched it and nodded. "The things people will do for money," he said. "Let's go to work." "Then I called you," I said, looking at Darnell. "I walked you through exactly what needed to happen. At 8 a.m., you were to go downstairs. You were to brew the coffee same as any other morning. Pour yourself a cup, and then scream." Darnell picked up the thread himself, his voice unsteady with the weight of remembering. "I did it. I poured the coffee. Didn't even bring it to my face. Just tipped it straight into the sink. Then I screamed, grabbed my chest, and went down right here by the island. Renee came flying down those stairs in her silk robe. She saw me on the ground. She saw the empty cup. And then Dad, my face twisted in pain. She didn't call 911. She just stood there watching, hand pressed over her mouth, watching me die. She just stood in that doorway and watched. I picked the story back up, my voice gone flat and cold. I told Renee I was on my way over to surprise you both. When I found you, I made a show of calling 911, but that call never went through to 911. It went to Ruford's private cell. He was parked 5 blocks away in a rental. He arrived in 7 minutes, that old black medical bag in hand. He looked every inch the part. He got to work. He ran chest compressions, oxygen mask on your face. And Renee stood off to the side, wringing her hands, performing the hysterical wife for an audience of none. After 10 minutes, Ruford straightened up. He looked at me. He looked at her, and he said, "I'm sorry, Curtis. He's gone. Massive coronary, nothing to be done." I looked at Darnell. That's the moment she started to scream. But son, that wasn't grief coming out of her throat. That was the sound of winning. "We had to move quickly after that," I said. Renee was already on her phone, her parents most likely, the celebration already underway. I stepped in and told her I'd manage all the arrangements. Told her I was old-fashioned about these things, that I don't believe in cremation, that Darnell deserved a proper burial. She went along with everything. Why would she object? She just wanted it done and behind her. My guess is she thought a traditional burial was beneath her taste anyway. I reached out to my contact at the funeral home, a man who carries a debt to me, and paid cash. Best casket on the floor, fastest timeline available. And I made one specific request: give me an hour alone with the casket before the viewing. That's when we loaded the weights, 200 pounds of sandbags. It was heavy. It felt exactly right. Then I sent Darnell the message. "I sent you the text, get out of the house now." Darnell nodded. While she handled the flowers over the phone, 20 minutes, not a moment longer, I threw what I needed into a bag and went out the back. I've been in a hotel downtown ever since watching my own funeral take shape from a distance. "And that's how we did it," I said. We handed her precisely what she'd been angling for: a dead husband, an empty casket, and just enough rope to finish the job herself. That photograph from Cancun, that's no slip-up. That's the swagger of a predator who believes the hunt is finished. She thinks the money is already hers. She thinks she's untouchable. I rose from my seat and moved to the kitchen window, looking out at the hushed, immaculate street, at the multi-million-dollar houses lined up in the dark. "She's about to find out," I said quietly. "She has never been in more danger than she is right now." Darnell lowered himself onto one of the kitchen stools. Both hands went to his head, fingers raking through his hair, his mind visibly grinding through the weight of the last 24 hours. "So that's it," he said, his voice a low growl threaded through with adrenaline and raw fury. "She's in Cancun. We have the video. We have Dr. Ruford's testimony. We go to the police. We call Baltimore PD right now. We hand them the recording. It's finished. He snatched his phone off the counter, his thumb already moving toward the 9, ready to end all of it. I covered his hand with mine. "No," said quietly, barely any force behind it. But it stopped him completely. He looked up, genuinely confused. "What do you mean, no, Dad? She tried to kill me. We have the proof." "We have a piece of proof," I said, steady and measured. "We have a grainy overhead video of her dropping something into a coffee machine. We have my word against hers. We also have a fraudulent death certificate that I arranged, which puts me on the hook for fraud and makes you a co-conspirator. Walk that story into a police station and ask yourself what happens next. She's smart Darnell. Ruthless, yes, but not careless. She'll say it was a vitamin supplement. She'll paint me as a grief-stricken old man who's lost his bearings. She'll argue you staged your own death to set her up. The whole thing gets complicated and complicated," I said, tapping the phone in his hand, "means she might walk right through the door we opened." I released his hand and turned back toward the window, out over the neat sloping lawn, stretching down to the street. The lawn Gareth was supposedly hired to maintain. "No, son. We're not handing this to the police. We're going to let her deliver herself to them. Renee and that gardener Gareth, they made a mistake. A fatal one. The same mistake every greedy, arrogant person makes eventually." Darnell's brow creased. "What mistake?" "They didn't do their homework," I said. "They operated on assumptions. They heard you were my only heir. They looked at this house and the cars in the driveway. They figured you were the direct path to everything I'd built, and that the instant you were gone, my assets, every last thing I'd spent my life accumulating, would flow straight to your grieving widow." I turned from the window to face him, and for the first time, I let the smallest cold smile settle on my face. They're sitting there believing the game is won. They think they've secured the inheritance. The truth, Darnell, is that they've just lost everything. They simply haven't been told yet. "Dad, I don't follow," Darnell said, getting to his feet. "They would inherit. I drew up a will 5 years ago. My half goes to you, my half goes to her, and your will, everything comes to me. When you're gone, she'd eventually get all of it. She's not wrong about that." "No, son. She is." It was time to lay it out, the truth I had kept from even him deliberately, so he could carve out his own life on his own foundation without the shadow of it over him. "Your mother, Evelyn, and I said, my voice easing just slightly at the mention of her. "We didn't just get by with the logistics company. This wasn't simply a comfortable retirement we were building toward." I watched my son's expression shift as the meaning behind the words began to settle, as the full weight of what was coming started to register. When I sold Curtis and Son Logistics to that international conglomerate after Evelyn passed, they weren't just acquiring equipment. They bought the routes, the contracts, the name, the whole operation. They paid me $50 million. Darnell's jaw came unhinged. He actually stumbled back a half step and caught himself on the marble counter. $50 million. $50 million, son. Cash, I said. And I understood in that moment that money wasn't a gift. It was a target painted on my back. It was a burden. So I didn't drop it into a savings account somewhere. I didn't go and buy myself a mansion out in Guilford. I took every single cent, every penny of it, and put it inside an ironclad, irrevocable trust. I named it the Evelyn and Curtis Foundation Trust, and I am the sole beneficiary. Darnell said, his mind working frantically to connect the dots. "So if I die, it passes to my wife. It goes to Renee. That's the way it works. She's my legal spouse." "That," I said, leveling a finger at him, "is what she assumed. That is what you assumed. But neither of you ever read the fine print, Darnell. I made sure of it." I crossed the room to the old leather briefcase I'd brought from home, the one I'd carried for 30 years. I snapped it open and drew out a single crisp document. I had my lawyers in Charlotte draft this trust with one very specific, very important clause. A clause I built in to guard our family's legacy against exactly this kind of thing, against a predator like her. I put the paper in his hands. He read it, eyes moving across the dense legal language, his fingers trembling. He reached what I needed him to find. Section 4, paragraph B. His breath caught. It says, his voice gave out before the words could come. I completed the sentence. It says, in the event of Darnell's death, the assets of the trust pass to his legal heirs, provided they are of his bloodline. Darnell raised his eyes, the weight of understanding landing on him like a physical blow. "Children! Children!" I confirmed. "And if you die without children, Darnell dropped his gaze back to the document, his voice a stunned hollow whisper as he read on. If the beneficiary Darnell dies without issue, the entirety of the $50 million principal and all accrued interest are to be immediately and irrevocably transferred to the Children's Hospital Foundation of Baltimore. I let the silence settle over the room, heavy and absolute. Renee had plotted, schemed, and poisoned her husband for an inheritance she could never touch. By killing Darnell before they had a child, she had personally guaranteed herself not a single penny. "She doesn't get anything," Darnell whispered. I gave one slow nod, my face hard as stone. "She gets nothing." Darnell held his eyes on the document, breath snagging in his throat. "She gets nothing. She killed me for nothing." I placed my hand on his shoulder, the first time I had touched my son since I'd held him in that kitchen while he slipped away. "Worse than nothing, son," I said, my voice a low rumble in the dark kitchen. "She killed you for a $50 million prize that she herself made impossible to claim. And right now," I glanced at the old analog clock mounted above his designer stove, the one Evelyn had given us 30 years ago. "She has no idea. Right now, she and that gardener boy are in Cancun. They've already posted the pictures just like we knew they would. They're celebrating, sitting poolside, most likely phones in hand, waiting on a lawyer to ring. They're expecting to hear they've inherited this $5 million house and maybe $1 million or $2 from the old man's savings. They think they've hit the jackpot." I reached for my own phone, not the basic flip phone I carry around Baltimore. This was my business phone, an encrypted satellite device worth more than most people's cars. "They're waiting for a lawyer to call," I said, a grim satisfaction settling deep in my chest. "So, let's give them one." Darnell looked up, the fog of shock finally burning off, replaced by the cold, sharp edge of my anger reflected in his eyes. "Dad, what are you—" I raised a single hand and cut him off. I pressed one on the speed dial. It barely rang half a ring before she picked up, same as always. "Curtis." The voice was crisp, professional, and carried more authority than a Supreme Court justice. "Yvette," I said, "it's time for phase 2. I hung up. Nothing more needed saying. Yvette Drummond knows exactly how I operate. She's the finest attorney in Charlotte, the sharpest legal mind in the state, and she is the only person on this earth, besides me, who knew the true contents of the Evelyn and Curtis Foundation Trust. She wrote it herself. The scene shifts. We are no longer in the cold, dark stainless steel kitchen in Baltimore. We are in a high-rise office in Charlotte, all glass and gleaming surfaces overlooking a city skyline, glittering like a spread of diamonds. Yvette Drummond, a polished, formidable black woman in her late 50s, sits behind an enormous desk. She doesn't carry herself like a lawyer. She carries herself like a queen. She reviews her notes, takes a measured sip of water, and keys a number into her console. She presses the speakerphone button. The line rings, once, twice. The scene cuts again. We are in Cancun. The sunlight is blinding. The sound of waves and distant salsa music drifts through the air. Renee is stretched out on a white cabana bed beside an infinity pool. Gareth, shirtless and glistening, is rubbing coconut oil across her back. Her phone rings. She glances at it, irritated. "Ugh, who is it now?" she mutters. Then she catches the unknown caller, ID, out of Charlotte, North Carolina. Her entire bearing shifts. She snatches the phone. She sits bolt upright, pulling a silk robe around her bikini. Her expression collapses instantly into a mask of practiced, profound grief. She waves a frantic hand at Gareth to keep quiet. She draws a shaky, audible breath, a flawless performance. She answers the call. Hello?" Her voice is a masterpiece of shattered fragility. Yvette's voice fills the air, deep, professional, heavy with authority. "Am I speaking with Mrs. Vanthorpe?" Yes, this is she." Renee breathes as if the words themselves cost her something. "Mrs. Vanthorpe, my name is Yvette Drummond. I am the chief legal counsel and executor of the estate for the late Mr. Curtis." Renee gasps a perfect, sharp intake of breath. Oh my God," she stammers. This is all so sudden. First my husband, my beloved Darnell, and now Curtis. I hadn't even heard I'm sorry. I'm not myself. I'm not in the country. I had to get away. The grief was too much." Gareth in the background is nodding quietly, mouthing his approval of her performance. "Of course, Mrs. Vanthorpe." Yvette says, her voice softening with a false empathy that could earn an Academy Award. I am so very, very sorry for your losses. This must be an overwhelming and devastating time. I am calling because this is a matter of extreme time-sensitive urgency. Renee leans forward. Time-sensitive. What do you mean? Yes, Yvette says. I am looking at Mr. Curtis's final will and testament. It is quite straightforward. He left his entire estate without exception to his only son, Darnell. Oh, Renee says, a small, hopeful sound. But, Yvette continues, as Mr. Darnell is now also deceased, and he passed after his father, the estate by law transfers directly to you, his legal spouse and next of kin. You, Mrs. Vanthorpe, are the sole heir to the entire Curtis estate. Renee goes silent. We can hear her quick, shallow breathing over the speaker. Me, she finally whispers. The sole heir, I thought Curtis. I mean, I didn't expect. I thought he just had the house and the old company. Mrs. Vanthorpe, Yvette gently cuts in. I don't believe you grasp the full scope of your father-in-law's holdings. Mr. Curtis was the sole owner of the Evelyn and Curtis Foundation Trust. We are currently finalizing the liquidation of his primary assets. The total value of the estate is estimated at $50 million. A heavy thud comes through the line. Gareth has clearly dropped something. Renee gasps a sound that is no longer a performance. 50. Did you say 50 million? That's a conservative estimate, yes? Yvette says, her tone shifting firm, all business now. Which brings us to the urgent matter. Mr. Curtis was a very particular man. He included what he called a continuity of life clause in the trust. It requires the final heir in this case, you, to sign for the transfer of assets in person at our Baltimore satellite office within 48 hours of being notified of the inheritance. 48 hours! Renee's voice climbs to a high-pitched squeak. But I'm in Cancun. I came here to grieve. I can't possibly... Mrs. Vanthorpe? Yvette's voice cuts through her like cold water. I understand this is difficult timing, but the trust is ironclad. This is not a request. It is a legal requirement. If the deadline is missed, the entire $50 million principal, along with all accrued interest, defaults permanently and irrevocably to the Children's Hospital Foundation of Baltimore. No, Renee shouts, her grieving widow act completely forgotten. No, you can't. I'm not doing anything, Mrs. Vanthorpe. I am simply reading the document. The clock began the moment you answered this call. You now have 47 hours and 58 minutes. I suggest you book a flight. Congratulations on your inheritance. Yvette hangs up. Back in the Charlotte office, she eases back into her chair. A small, satisfied smile crosses her face. The trap is set. The bait is taken. The rat is running against the clock. The click of the line going dead rang out like a gunshot in the Cancun sunlight. Renee stared down at her phone, the widow's mask completely gone, dissolved by the sheer heat of the number she had just heard. $50 million. Gareth, who had been pacing restlessly near the cabana, walked over. So, what did the lawyer say? Are we rich or what? Renee turned to him slowly. Her eyes were wide, almost manic. 50, she whispered, her voice barely above a rasp. What 50,000, that's it? Gareth scoffed. Renee shook her head, a hysterical laugh rising in her throat. No, you idiot. 50 million? Gareth went still. The smirk dropped from his face, replaced by a look of naked animalistic greed. 50 million, he repeated, seizing her by the shoulders. You're serious, Renee? 50... Yes, she shrieked, pushing him off. And we have to move. Right now. We've got 48 hours to get to Baltimore and sign the papers, or every last cent goes to charity. The scene exploded. The slow, sun-drenched vacation was finished. Now, Gareth bellowed. Grab your passport, leave the clothes, we have to go. Renee was already scrambling, snatching her purse, flinging her silk robe down onto the sand. The flight, Gareth. We need a flight. They ran barefoot across the scorching pool deck, blind to the stairs following them. They burst through the doors into the air-conditioned lobby of the resort. My God! Gareth panted, his mind visibly spinning. 50 million, Renee. This changes the split. Shut up, she snapped, making a beeline for the concierge desk. We'll talk about the split once we're holding the money. She slammed her credit card, Darnell's credit card, down on the marble counter. I need 2 first-class tickets to Baltimore, Maryland, the next flight out. Cost is not a concern, just book it. Now. The concierge, caught off guard, began typing at a frantic pace. Gareth stood at her back, one hand gripping her arm. "This is it, baby," he whispered, but the lover's warmth had gone out of his voice. What was left was the voice of a co-conspirator who had just learned the job was 10 times bigger than he'd been told. "This is everything." Pure uncut greed and desperation poured off them in waves. The grieving widow was dead. In her place, a hungry scavenger had taken over. The flight touched down at BWY Airport at 4:17 in the morning. I know because I had my eyes on the flight tracker, but I wasn't watching from my little brick house on the west side. I was in my real home. I stood before a wall of glass 50 stories above a sleeping city. The Legg Mason Tower rose just across the water. This was my penthouse, the one I acquired in the 1990s under a corporate shell company. The one that served as my true office, my fortress of solitude. The one Darnell himself didn't know existed until the night before. Darnell was here with me now. He stood beside the modern ribbon flame fireplace, looking out over the city he thought he understood. We were not the men from the funeral. I was no longer the broken-hearted old man in the worn-down suit. I had on a custom-tailored midnight blue vest and slacks. My shirt was silk. I could feel the power moving through me. Darnell wore a suit I'd had my tailor cut for him the previous day. The fear had left his eyes entirely. He looked like a leader. He looked like me. "I still can't believe any of this, Dad," he said quietly, his voice carrying slightly in the vast open room. He gestured toward the original Romare Bearden collages on the wall, the heavy mahogany desk, the telescope aimed toward the Canadian border. "You lived here this whole time." "I worked here, son," I said, stepping away from the window. "Your mother and I made a decision. We built our life inside our community. We didn't want to raise our boy in a golden cage. We wanted you hungry. We wanted you to build something with your own hands. Money." I said, moving toward my desk, "is a tool. But to people like Renee, it's a sickness. It draws in predators. I built these walls to keep them at bay." I looked at him, my chest aching for the lesson life had forced on him. "I just never imagined the predator would already be inside your front door." I turned to the large dark monitor set into the wall. It read 9:10 a.m. "They're here," I said. Darnell moved to stand beside me. We were watching a live feed from a high-security camera. Not the penthouse, this was the satellite office of Yvette Drummond's law firm 10 blocks away. A long, imposing conference room, a 30-foot black table, 20 empty leather chairs, a stage, a trap. The conference room door swung open and the rats stepped into the maze. Renee and Gareth stumbled inside. They looked like they'd been pulled through a storm head first. Neither had slept in 2 days. Renee's expensive travel outfit was hopelessly wrinkled. Her perfect blonde hair, usually her crowning glory, was greasy and yanked back in a desperate, messy bun. Gareth looked even worse. His eyes were bloodshot, his shirt untucked. He was buzzing with a manic energy exhaustion, and raw adrenaline wound tight together. But their eyes were sharp, bright with a terrible, consuming hunger. They stood in the doorway, taking in the empty, opulent room. "Wow," Gareth muttered, his voice hoarse. He dragged a hand along the back of one of the heavy leather chairs. 50 million. This is the real deal, Renee. This is the big league." "Shut up, Gareth," Renee hissed, her voice a low growl. She was frantically trying to smooth her blouse. "Act professional, and for God's sake, act sad. Remember, I'm the grieving widow." "Yeah, right," Gareth scoffed, dropping his voice. "The grieving widow who chartered a private jet from Tampa to make it here on time. Just keep your eye on the signature. Get the money. We can act devastated on the way to the bank." They settled at the far end of the long table, looking small and out of their depth, eyes fixed on the door, waiting for the woman holding the checkbook. The door opened again. This time, it was not a disheveled predator. It was Yvette Drummond. She was the picture of absolute authority. Her suit was immaculate, her pearls were real, and her face was a mask of cold professionalism. She entered, followed by a junior associate carrying a stack of files. She didn't spare them a glance. She walked directly to the head of the table and sat, setting her briefcase down in front of her. The associate began placing glasses of water around the room. We watched from the monitor. Darnell's hand tightened on the arm of his chair, knuckles going white. "She's terrified of that lawyer," he whispered. "She should be," I replied. Renee was visibly trembling. That long, silent walk from the door to the chair had gutted her confidence. She was a minnow who had wandered into a tank with a great white shark. Yvette finally looked up. "Showtime," I whispered. We stood there in the penthouse watching the monitor, Darnell and I side by side in the dark. The conference room door opened and Yvette Drummond walked in. I call her a lawyer, but that's not really what she is. She's a fixer. She's the woman who kept my $50 million fortune legally invisible for 2 decades. She walked to the head of that 30-foot table, her heels striking a sharp, authoritative click, click, click on the polished hardwood floor. She didn't look at Renee or Gareth, didn't acknowledge them at all. She simply sat, placed her thin, elegant briefcase on the table, and began arranging her materials. A pen here, a legal pad there, a glass of water. It was a masterclass in cold, deliberate control. From the monitor, I could see them clearly. Renee and Gareth. They looked like students summoned to the principal's office, jittery, hollowed out from their chartered flight, radiating an ugly electric greed. Renee kept pawing at her wrinkled clothes. Gareth was picking at a cuticle on his thumb, his eyes cutting around the room, no doubt appraising every piece on the walls. Yvette let the silence stretch a full minute, an agonizing, suffocating void. She let them cook in their own anticipation. Then finally she looked up. Her eyes, slightly magnified behind her expensive glasses, held no warmth. They were the eyes of an eagle fixed on 2 mice. "Mrs. Vanthorpe," she said. Her voice was smooth as silk, but with an edge of tempered steel. "Mr. Gareth, thank you for coming on such short notice." Renee flinched, startled by the voice. She snapped immediately into character, the grieving widow's mask dropping back into place. Her shoulders caved, her hand rose to her chest. She produced a small, trembling sigh. "Mrs. Drummond, thank you. Thank you for seeing us," she said. Her voice was a flawless imitation of someone fighting not to fall apart. "As you can imagine, this is just the hardest time of my life. I'm still in shock." She actually dabbed at a dry eye with her sleeve. Standing beside me, I heard Darnell release a low growl. "She's good," he whispered. "She's practiced," I said. I hadn't forgotten watching her at her own father's funeral 5 years ago. Those rehearsed sobs were identical, the same calculated hitch in the throat, the same choreographed grief. 2 days after her own father's burial, she'd tracked me down, asking me to co-sign a BMW loan, claiming she needed a car that felt safe for the drive to therapy. The woman was an artist, a viper dressed in silk. First my husband. Renee pressed on her voice, fracturing right on schedule. My beloved Darnell, and now Curtis. Curtis, who was practically a father figure to me. Her face dropped into her palms, body heaving with stage sorrow. "Forgive me, I'm simply not holding together." Gareth, the fool of a gardener, actually reached over and began rubbing circles on her back. Yet his gaze never strayed from Yvette's briefcase. "We just want to put this behind us, ma'am." Gareth offered, working to sound humble. It's been overwhelming for her." Renee raised her eyes wide and desperate. "He's absolutely right. Can we just get to the signing? I'm running on empty here. All I want is to go home and grieve in peace." The steel in Yvette Drummond's face melted into something approaching warmth. She offered them a look so full of corporate compassion, it was almost art. "Of course, Mrs. Vanthorpe," she said, her tone soft and almost maternal now. "I completely understand. We'll move through this as gently as we can." She unlatched her briefcase. The snap of it cut through the quiet like a shot. Out came a thick, authoritative stack of papers, bound in deep blue. Impressive looking, also, as I knew, 200 pages of the 1997 Baltimore phone book that her associate had bound earlier that morning. "This," she announced, pushing the heavy bundle across the table toward them, "is the full asset portfolio for the Evelyn and Curtis Foundation Trust. The cover sheet shows the final audited valuation." Renee and Gareth surged forward simultaneously, their foreheads nearly knocking. I could make out the figure on the mock cover sheet through the camera. $51.2 million. Renee's eyes just consumed that number. Every trace of mourning was gone from her face. This was the prize she had committed murder to collect. "And this," Yvette said quietly, drawing out a single page alongside a heavy silver and onyx fountain pen. "This is the final signatory form, a straightforward transfer of assets. Your signature on this line," she touched the spot, "confirms receipt of the inheritance and releases the full $51.2 million into your name." Renee moved without a moment's pause. Not one word read, not one question raised. Not a single genuine tear for either of the men whose deaths had brought her to this table. She reached across and seized the fountain pen knuckles blanching white. The bereaved widow had vanished for good. What sat in that chair now was pure, uncut scavenger. Her fingers were trembling as the pen's nib descended toward the page. Wait! Yvette raised one perfectly manicured hand. Not a request, an instruction. Renee stopped cold pen suspended half an inch above the paper. Her face whipped upward, stripped of everything except naked, startled irritation. The grieving mask had collapsed so completely it was almost funny. What? She bit out. What's the problem? Is there an issue with the account? Not at all, Yvette replied, and there was that thin blade-like smile I'd seen her deploy 100 times. The funds are entirely secure. This is purely procedural, a small formality our insurance underwriters require before releasing an amount of this size. Her voice dropped, taking on a tone of helpful confidentiality. We simply need you to state on the record the official cause of your husband Darnell's death. Up in the penthouse, 50 floors above the city, I stood at Darnell's shoulder and watched that monitor without blinking. The picture from Yvette's conference room was razor sharp. 2 rats in a sealed maze, and Renee and Gareth had no idea the exits were already bolted. Both of them went rigid at the same instant. Renee's hand, the one wrapped around that expensive pen, locked up hovering a quarter-inch from the signature line, she believed was the gateway to $50 million. Gareth, who'd been pitched forward with hunger written all over his face, jerked upright. The smugness evaporated. What replaced it was pallor and a thin film of cold sweat. The cause of death, Renee repeated, stumbling over the words. Something fundamental shifted in her voice. The delicate shattered widow register crumbled, and what rose in its place was the sharp-cornered pitch of a person whose story is unraveling. What do you... It was his heart. The Dr. Okafor, he filed the death certificate. He documented a massive coronary, a sudden tragic cardiac defect. Gareth, deciding on the spot that this had to be some routine verification, lunged in to shore her up. Right, exactly, he said, his voice bouncing too loud off the walls. A complete tragedy. His heart it gave out without any warning. She hasn't been the same since. We're only here to wrap up the paperwork. He made another move to lay a hand on her back in a show of comfort, but Renee shrank away from the touch eyes locked on Yvette. And on the monitor, I watched Yvette Drummond smile. I have never in my life seen anything quite like it. Not a shred of warmth in it, not a hint of humor. It was the expression of a surgeon, the moment the blade touches skin, a smile built entirely from precision and the promise of consequence. Indeed, Yvette said, her voice as smooth as polished glass. Dr. Okafor's report was quite thorough. She settled back into her tall leather chair and laced her fingers together. A sudden catastrophic cardiac event, tragic just as you've described. She let those words sit there between them like a stone dropped in still water. Let the expanding silence do its work. And yet, Mrs. Vanthorpe, that is precisely what makes the next item so curious. A small, seemingly minor detail that surfaced during our auditor's review of the estate. From the thin leather briefcase she'd carried for 20 years, Yvette lifted a clear plastic evidence bag onto the table. She did it without haste, without drama. Inside sat a dark glass vial, roughly 2 inches tall, fitted with an eyedropper cap. Right there beside me, I heard Darnell pull a sharp breath through his teeth. Dad, that's the bottle. That's the one. No, I said, under my breath, eyes fixed on the screen. It's a copy. Last night I ordered 3 of them from a chemical supply store online. She has no way of knowing that. Yvette nudged the evidence bag along the surface of that 30-foot table. It traveled in silence smooth as a hockey puck and came to rest squarely in front of Renee's shaking hands. Our investigators recovered this, Mrs. Vanthorpe. Yvette said, her tone easy, almost conversational. It was sitting in the back of your kitchen spice cabinet tucked behind a jar of oregano. Every drop of color left Renee's face. Chalk. She had gone chalk white. She stared at that little vial as though it might rear back and strike her. On the feed, I could catch the micro-tremor moving through her fingers. Gareth's eyes bounced vial to Renee to vial. Something was clicking into place behind his eyes. She had kept things from him, and he was only now beginning to understand how much. We conducted a preliminary toxicology screen on the residue remaining inside, Yvette went on as conversationally as if she were reading a grocery list. The compound is tetramethylene disulfotetramine, a strictly controlled neurotoxin banned across the globe as far as I'm aware. In plain language, a poison engineered to produce massive, untraceable heart failure. The silence that followed was total. I watched perspiration surface along Renee's hairline, right at the edge of her perfect blonde roots. There was no exit. She understood that. Renee's words fractured eyes, skittering between Yvette's frozen stare and the new suspicion spreading across Gareth's face. I have never laid eyes on that in my life. I have no idea what that substance even is. A brittle little laugh tried to form and died before it got anywhere. It's probably something old. Good heavens, maybe it's pest control or something for the garden, Gareth, she said, pivoting to him with a raw, clawing desperation in her voice. That's a garden product, isn't it, for the hydrangeas? You must have set it down in the kitchen by mistake. She was going under, and she had decided she was taking Gareth with her. Gareth didn't move an inch. He sat there looking at her, his face drained of everything except a slow, spreading dread. Yvette Drummond lifted her heavy silver and onyx fountain pen and began tapping it against her legal pad. Tap, tap, tap. In that airless room, each tap landed like a gavel strike. Pest control, she echoed, turning the word over, as though genuinely entertained by it. That is quite a theory, Mrs. Van Thorpe. Quite a defense. Her gaze came up, and behind those expensive lenses, her eyes had narrowed to 2 fine points. Though I do find myself wondering why exactly would anyone be pouring pest control into their husband's coffee machine. There it was, the bluff, the decisive move. The actual footage sat safely with Darnell and me in the penthouse, but Yvette was performing as though it were spread across the table in front of them. Renee pulled back as if the words had physically struck her. What? Her voice broke into a high, thin shriek. I never. That is a completely insane accusation. That is a lie. Is it? Before you hear what happens next and what is about to crack this entire room wide open, let me ask you something. If someone you believed was an ally turned out to have been working against the people you love from the very beginning, would you rather have known sooner, or is there power in letting them think they're still safe? Yvette pressed her voice, dropping to something quiet and dangerous. Because we also have the security footage from your kitchen. The camera you never knew was there. The one that puts you, Mr. Gareth, and this little bottle together in the same frame. The one that captures you counting out the drops. That was enough. The bluff had landed. Gareth didn't stop to calculate. He wasn't a lover. He wasn't a partner in anything. He was a cornered animal, ready to gnaw through his own leg to break free. He blew out of his chair. The heavy leather seat went over backward and hit the hardwood with the crack of a gunshot. It was her, he screamed, voice spiking into raw, high-pitched panic. His shaking finger drove straight at Renee. Every bit of it was her idea. I didn't even know what that stuff was. I swear on my life. Gareth, what are you doing? Shut your mouth. Renee shrieked, hurling herself across the table, grabbing for his arm. No! Gareth shouted, stumbling back out of her reach. I am not going down with you. She told me it was a supplement, some kind of special vitamin. She said he was already sick and this would help him along. He was lying through his teeth and confessing at the exact same time. He turned his wild, desperate eyes on Yvette, who was observing him with the detached calm of a scientist recording data. She made me a promise, said once her husband was gone, she'd come into money. She promised me $5 million if I just kept my mouth shut and stayed close. I didn't touch anything. It was all her. Standing beside me in the penthouse, I heard Darnell release the breath he'd been holding for 25 years. Got him? He whispered. I gave one slow nod, eyes locked on the screen, as Renee's perfect $50 million world came apart at every seam all at once. We had them both. Darnell stood at my shoulder, arms crossed, face carved out of stone, watching the monitor. On that screen, Gareth's confession was still hanging in the air of that sterile conference room. She promised me $5 million if I just kept quiet. Renee's head swung toward him. Every trace of color left her face, and what filled the void was a pale, waxy mask of primal, undisguised hatred. She didn't merely look betrayed, she looked obliterated. 1 second of total silence. Then she erupted. It wasn't a word that came out. It was something from the bottom of her chest, a guttural animal sound, the sound of a predator backed into a corner. "You lying rat!" she screamed and threw herself across the polished table. This was no longer the polished grieving widow from Guilford. This was something feral, clawing to survive. Her perfectly shaped nails paid for with my son's money raked toward Gareth's face. "You begged me to do this," she screamed, scrambling over the table, sending the fake phone book portfolios flying in all directions. "You said he was weak. You're the one who found the poison. You said we'd come out of this rich." Gareth the coward backpedaled with both hands raised, trying to protect his face. "Get away from me, you're insane." He shoved her hard. She tumbled off the edge of the table and slammed into the wall, her expensive dress splitting at the seam. She crumpled to the floor in a heap. It was magnificent. Yvette Drummond, my lawyer, my fixer, sat right there at the head of that table, fingers still laced, watching the wreckage unfold with the mild, untroubled curiosity of someone taking in a nature documentary. She didn't so much as blink. "It was you." Renee screamed from the floor, jabbing a trembling finger at Gareth, who was pressing himself against the far wall. "You drove this. You said you knew exactly how to pull it off. You promised me nobody would ever find out." "I lied." Gareth screamed back, his voice cracking apart at the high end. "I told you whatever you needed to hear. I am not spending my life in a cell for you. $5 million is not worth 30 years, Renee. He was never even supposed to end up dead." Right. Just as Renee was coiling herself to lunge again, just as Gareth was sliding his hand toward the heavy brass handle of the conference room door to bolt click, a small, clean sound, the high-end electronic lock on the main doors disengaging. In the middle of all that hysterical screaming, it cut through like a blade. Renee froze, crouched halfway up from the floor. Gareth froze, hands suspended over the handle. Even Yvette, in her flawless performance, turned her head slowly toward the sound. All three of them stared at the imposing 12-foot-tall doors. Up in the penthouse, I slipped a small plain remote from my jacket pocket. I looked over at Darnell. His jaw was clenched so hard I thought something might give. I put my hand on his shoulder. "Showtime, son," I said quietly. I pressed the button. The doors didn't burst open. They moved slowly, silently, swinging inward on perfectly balanced hinges, and revealed the man waiting in the hallway. This was not the pale, hollowed-out figure Renee had watched crumple to the kitchen floor. This was not the body she had ordered white carnations for. My son Darnell stood in that doorway. He was a vision of absolute authority. He had on the three-piece navy suit I'd had my Charlotte tailor cut for him the previous week. White shirt, crisp, tie solid black, hair sharp, face clean-shaven. He looked healthy. He looked powerful. He looked like me. He didn't look at Gareth. He didn't look at Yvette. He didn't look at his wife Renee, still a wreck on the floor. He simply stood there and let them see him, let their minds grind and fail against the impossible. He reached up unhurried and adjusted the cufflinks at his wrists. Then he took one step into the room, then another. He let the silence fill up around him, fill with his presence, fill with the fact of his breathing. Renee was making a small strangled sound, like something drowning. Gareth hadn't moved, hadn't drawn a breath. Finally, Darnell smiled. It was my smile, the one I brought out for hostile takeovers. No warmth in it at all, only victory. $5 million, Gareth. Darnell's voice traveled through that vast, airless room, measured, conversational, absolutely terrifying. "Is that the figure she dangled in front of you?" He gave a slow, small shake of his head, something like pity moving across his face. "That's a shame." A quiet tut. "She promised me $50 million. The reaction was instant. Renee's face cycled through an entire universe of feeling, in under a second confusion, disbelief, the cold shock of animal terror, and then a comprehension so complete it struck her like something physical. A sound escaped her short, sharp, as though every molecule of air had been driven out of her body at once. Her eyes went wide, then rolled back. She didn't faint gracefully. She just fell sideways onto the carpet, a tangle of torn silk and ruined greed, and she did not move. Gareth was worse. He was still pinned against the far wall, mouth open, nothing coming out, staring at Darnell as if he were looking at something that had crawled out of the ground. But, he finally managed, his shaking finger aimed at my son. We saw you. You were dead." His eyes careened around the room, landing on me, on Yvette. "The funeral I, I saw the funeral. I saw the casket. Darnell didn't even glance at him. He walked past Gareth's quivering form without acknowledgement. He stepped right over his unconscious wife, where she lay on the floor. He moved to the head of the table, reached down and set the heavy leather chair upright, the one Gareth had knocked over. He settled into it, into the seat of power. He picked up the heavy silver and onyx fountain pen. Renee had dropped the one she'd been about to use to sign her $50 million confession and held it between his fingers, studying it, not them. An empty casket, Gareth. Darnell said, his voice falling to a chill whisper. You'd be amazed what money can arrange. He looked up, that cold smile back at the corner of his mouth. Just an empty box. His eyes moved down to Renee's body on the floor. Not unlike your inheritance, Renee. Not unlike the promise of our entire marriage. Those words settled over the room, cold and final. Gareth was still plastered against the far wall, his face the color of old wax. Renee, my daughter-in-law, was still a pile of torn silk and shattered illusions on the carpet. It was the most perfect silence I had ever been inside. I decided the architect of all this deserved to take his bow. I stepped out from the shadow of the hallway and moved to stand directly behind my son's chair. I had shed the cheap funeral suit long ago. I was no longer the devastated old man from the church steps. I had put on my real armor, a dark custom-made Keaton suit that cost more than Gareth's car crisp white shirt, no tie. I moved at a measured pace, my hard-soled leather shoes matching Yvette's earlier click-click-click on that polished floor. I was no longer a grieving father, I was a reckoning. Gareth spotted me first. His eyes, which I wouldn't have thought capable of going wider, somehow found a way. He looked like a man confronted by a second ghost, the one he actually had reason to fear. The old man... He stammered, his voice collapsing into a pitiful squeak. Renee, catching the terror in his voice, stirred on the floor. She shoved the greasy blonde hair from her face and looked up. Whatever raw animal fury had possessed her moments before had vanished, completely swallowed by a deep, bottomless confusion. "Curtis," she whispered. Her mind couldn't assemble what her eyes were telling her. You were at the funeral? You thought I was a sentimental, stupid old man," I finished for her. My voice carried none of the weak, shuffling quality she'd grown accustomed to. It was the voice I'd used to close $100 million deals. It was the voice that had built an empire from the dirt of Baltimore. You thought I was broken. You thought I was manageable. I stepped past her, dismissing her the way you'd step over trash on the floor. I crossed to the far wall where the 80-inch monitor hung like a blank black mirror. I drew the remote from the inner pocket of my suit jacket. "Hello, Renee. Hello, Gareth," I said, turning to face them. I even smiled. "I'm so glad you could make this meeting. I think there was a key piece of evidence missing from your planning. Yvette's bluff about a video was impressive." I said, my voice filling the room, calm, conversational. "But I've always found the real thing is so much more effective." I pressed play. The screen came alive. This was no bluff, no trick. It was high-definition, crystal-clear footage pulled straight from the micro camera in Darnell's kitchen. The room fell silent, nothing filling it but the audio pouring from the ceiling speakers. We watched Renee stroll in, laughing into her phone. "Yes, baby, just a few more days." Her voice rang out tinny and cruel. We watched Gareth appear. We watched them kiss. I glanced over at Darnell. He was seated at the head of the table, motionless. He didn't flinch. He just watched the screen, his face a still, unreadable mask. He was finished grieving the woman playing out before him. He was simply examining the evidence. On the screen, Gareth kissed her neck. "You're sure the old man's money goes to Darnell?" he asked. "Absolutely." Renee's voice answered, full of certainty. "He's the only heir, and I'm Darnell's only wife. The moment Darnell dies, we get everything." I looked down at Renee on the floor. She was staring at the screen, one hand pressed over her mouth, making small, horrified, choking sounds. She was watching herself. She was watching her own damnation play out in high definition. Then came the part that sent ice through my veins every single time I'd seen it. On the screen, Renee moved to the spice cabinet. She retrieved the small, dark vial. "This is the last of it," she said. 10 drops should be enough to finish a horse." We watched her count. 1, 2, 3. Her voice was clear and steady, almost cheerful, as she measured out the 10 drops of poison into the espresso machine's water tank. "Ready for tomorrow morning," she said, and kissed Gareth again. The screen went black. The silence that followed was absolute, heavier than a coffin lid. Gareth was hyperventilating, producing little wheezing sounds against the wall. Renee was simply broken. She was rocking back and forth on the floor, murmuring, "No, no, 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 no." "That," I said, turning back to the two of them, "is what I call evidence. Not a theory, not an accusation that is a high-definition, time-stamped recording of a conspiracy to commit first-degree murder." I gestured toward Darnell. "My son was kind enough to preserve the contents of that coffee machine. The police, by the way, are running tests on it as we speak. I imagine the toxicology report will make for fascinating reading." Gareth was sliding down the wall, his legs surrendering beneath him. He was finished. "But that's just the murder charge," I said almost casually, the way you'd mention a minor line item in a balance sheet. "Then there's the motive. I looked to Yvette. She knew her moment. Yvette Drummond leaned forward and lifted a small, sleek digital voice recorder from the desk in front of her. "Mr. Gareth," she said, her voice precise and legal, slicing through his panicked breathing. "You seem to be operating under the impression that you are a victim here, that you were simply helping." Gareth looked up, eyes wide, reaching for any desperate lifeline he could find. I told you," he blurted out. She manipulated me. She lied to me. She told me it was vitamins." "Did she?" Yvette asked, her voice wrapped in ice. She pressed play and the room filled with Gareth's own voice, from moments before screaming at full volume. The audio was pristine. "It was her. It was all her idea. She promised me $5 million if I just kept quiet and stayed with her. I'm not going down for this." Yvette stopped the recording. She regarded Gareth with a cold, devastating pity. "So, let's review, shall we, Mr. Gareth? You just admitted on a legally admissible recording that you were aware of the plot. You admitted you were offered $5 million, not to help with vitamins, but to stay silent. That is the legal definition of an accessory to murder. You didn't just confess your involvement, you confessed your price." Gareth's face collapsed. Whatever last shred of fight had been holding him together, whatever final desperate bid to save himself, simply evaporated. He slid the rest of the way down the wall and settled onto the floorhead in his hands. He understood. He had not only failed to collect the money, he had just talked himself into a life sentence. He was done. And then there was Renee. She was still on the floor, but she'd stopped rocking. She was staring into nothing. She had seen the video of her own crime. She had listened to her lover betray and confess her in a single breath. She had watched her dead husband walk in, very much alive. And she had seen me, the stupid, sentimental old man, standing beside him, directing the entire performance. She had been outmaneuvered, outplayed, and utterly, completely destroyed. She looked up at me. Her eyes were empty. The fire gone. The 50 million? She whispered, her voice a dry, rattling rasp. It was the only thought still functioning inside her. The money. You lied. There is no 50 million. I almost laughed. "Oh, Renee," I said, shaking my head as I moved toward her. "That's the funniest part. That is the one thing I never lied about. The $50 million is very, very real." Her eyes opened wider, a tiny fractured spark of hope flickering up through the ruins. You're still nothing." I cut her off, standing over her. "You see, you never actually read the trust. You never did the real research. The trust passes to Darnell's bloodline, his children. And since you were too consumed with trying to kill him to have any the instant he died, that 50 million vanished. It went straight to the Children's Hospital Foundation of Baltimore. That was the final blow. Not the video, not the confession, not the ghost of her husband standing in the room. It was the money, the knowledge that she had committed murder for a prize she herself had made impossible to claim. She looked at me, her face a perfect portrait of horror, opened her mouth and released a single soul-shattering scream. She had lost. Completely. Renee's scream was pure white-hot rage. The knowledge that the 50 million was gone, burned away by her own choices, was the ultimate betrayal. It was the only thing that had ever truly mattered to her. She launched herself off the floor, not at me, not at the husband she'd tried to bury, but at Gareth. He was the one who had confessed. He was the one who had spoken. He was the weak link. "You," she shrieked, her voice a raw, tearing sound. "It was you. You ruined everything, you pathetic, stupid gardener. You couldn't even keep your mouth shut. This was not the polished, composed woman from Guilford. This was something feral. She clawed at his face, her red-painted nails raking his cheek and drawing blood. She grabbed his shirt and wrenched it, tearing the fabric. "It's all your fault," she screamed, trying to bite his hand. "My money, my life, you destroyed it." But Gareth was not the dim, simple-minded lover she'd always taken him for. He didn't strike back. He didn't even look angry. With a speed and economy of motion that was almost elegant, he caught both her wrists in one hand and twisted just enough to neutralize her, the threat handled instantly. He held her there, squirming and spitting, with the detached patience of a man managing a misbehaving animal. He looked at her, at this hysterical, disintegrating creature, and for the first time, I understood what he actually was. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't angry. He was bored. He regarded her with a deep, measured, almost mournful pity. "You still don't get it, do you, Renee?" he said. His voice was no longer the rough, uneducated drawl she'd grown accustomed to. It was measured, crisp, polished. That shift in tone, more than the physical restraint, stopped her cold. She froze, breath catching, her eyes snapping back to that same wide-eyed bewilderment. I decided the moment had come. I stepped out from behind my son. "Let her go, Gareth," I said, my voice level. Gareth met my eyes, gave a single nod, and pushed her away. She stumbled back hard, colliding with the heavy conference table, her breathing breaking into ragged, choking sobs. She stared at Gareth, her mind already fracturing, struggling to absorb this impossible new reality. What is this?" she whispered, her gaze darting wildly between me, Darnell, and this man who was supposed to be her instrument. Who is he?" I walked slowly until I stood right beside Gareth. He was relaxed, composed, the posture of a soldier at ease before his commanding officer. I reached up and calmly straightened the collar of his torn shirt. "That's an excellent question, Renee," I said. "First smart one you've asked since I met you. You really should have asked it 6 months ago." I turned to face her. "You're right about one thing. He's not a gardener. I doubt he's touched a shovel in his life. And he's certainly not some cheap hustler, though he plays that role convincingly, wouldn't you say?" I almost let myself smile. He'd had her completely fooled. Renee was shaking her head, fighting the reality that was closing around her like a fist. "No, no. Gareth," I said, my voice slicing through her denial, "is a private investigator. He runs one of the top corporate intelligence firms in Charlotte, and for the past 6 months, he has been on my payroll." The last trace of color drained from Renee's face. It finally landed. She wasn't the predator. She was the project. "You see, Renee?" I continued, moving slowly toward her, hands clasped at my back. "You're not nearly as good at concealment as you believe. You're careless, arrogant. I watched you spending Darnell's money. I saw the new car you leased while he was out of town. I saw the designer bags. I saw the credit card statements you believed were hidden, the ones routed to a private post office box. One phone call was all it took to track them down. I didn't hire Mr. Gareth here simply to watch you. That would have been too easy. I hired him to get close to you, to find out exactly what you were made of." I stopped directly in front of her. "I had a theory. I thought you were just a common gold digger bleeding my son dry while he was too blind to see it. But Gareth had a different read. He met you once at that disastrous charity dinner you dragged Darnell to, watched you for 5 minutes and told me, 'Mr. Curtis, that woman isn't a gold digger. She's a sociopath. She doesn't just want his money, she wants his life.' I thought he was reaching. Turned out he was dead right." "So he played his part," I said, gesturing toward Gareth, who was now quietly wiping the blood from his cheek with a handkerchief. "He became the easygoing, good-looking gardener. He listened to you gripe about your inattentive husband. He agreed that you deserve better. He made himself easy to reach. And you, Renee," I said, my voice dropping with contempt, "took the bait. You fell into his arms in under a week. You didn't just carry on an affair, you confessed. You told him everything. You told him about your $200,000 in gambling debts. You told him how you wished Darnell was just out of the picture. You were the one," I said, leaning in, "who first put the word poison on the table. Gareth simply confirmed my worst fears. He told me you were actively searching for a way to kill my son. So we handed you one. He was the one who told you about the specialist in Mexico. He was the one who gave you the first vial, the test vial, the one you believed was making Darnell sick. It was saline, Renee, salt water. He was recording you the whole time, waiting for you to make the final move. But you got impatient, didn't you?" I said. You couldn't even bring yourself to trust your own partner in crime. You went out and sourced your own poison, the real thing, the one you put on display in that video. You were certain nobody would ever see. You were so reckless, so arrogant, you carried out that final fatal step entirely on your own. Gareth installed the micro camera in the kitchen. He's the one who handed me the high-definition footage of you alone, counting out those 10 drops. He was part of this plan with me, with Darnell, with Dr. Okafor, every single step, Renee. Every breath you drew, you were the one being played. I looked at her, this broken, pathetic, vicious woman on the floor. You thought you were a wolf stalking a golden goose. You were just a rat inside my maze. And the maze just ended. Renee's scream, that terrible high-pitched wail of pure, unfiltered devastation, finally died in her throat. It wasn't the sound of fear or even rage. It was the sound of a gambler watching the last card flip over and realizing she hadn't just lost the hand, she'd lost everything. She remained on the floor, a crumpled, pitiful heap of torn silk and shattered ambition. She stared at Gareth, the man she'd believed was her lover, her pawn, her dim-witted, pliable gardener. Now, he was just another man in a suit, calmly dabbing the blood from his cheek, regarding her, with the cold detachment of someone reviewing a closed case file. Then her head turned slow, mechanical. She looked at Darnell, her husband, the ghost, the golden goose who'd come back from the dead, not to love her, but to bury her. Then she looked at Yvette Drummond, the attorney who was already serenely reorganizing her prop-filled binders of fake documents, her expression utterly composed, as though she were simply wrapping up a routine tax matter. And finally she looked at me. Her eyes. I've lived 72 years. I have seen desperation in the back alleys of Baltimore. I have seen arrogance in high-rise boardrooms. I have seen greed and I have seen fury. But I had never encountered a void like the one staring back at me from Renee's eyes in that moment. A complete hollowed-out blankness. The $50 million was gone. The fabricated inheritance was gone. Her lover was a fraud. Her husband was alive, and he despised her. The entire world she had killed for had been erased in under 5 minutes. She didn't cry. Crying belongs to grief. Crying belongs to sorrow. She was far past all of that. A strange rattling sound crawled out of her throat, a low, guttural laugh. It was the most unsettling sound I have ever heard. You... She whispered, her voice, a dry, scraped rasp. She was looking straight at me. You, old man. The emptiness in her eyes was suddenly and spectacularly consumed by a flame, a pure, black, bottomless hatred almost striking in its ferocity. She finally understood. She hadn't been beaten by Darnell. She hadn't been beaten by Gareth or the lawyer. She had been beaten by me, the sentimental, foolish old man from the funeral, the grieving, shuffling figure she'd written off as harmless. You did this, she hissed it, spitting the words out. All of it, the funeral, the lawyer, him. She jabbed a trembling claw-like finger toward Gareth. You played me. You all played me. We didn't play you, Renee. Darnell's voice cut through the air, cold and quiet. He rose from his seat at the head of the table. We just gave you the stage. You wrote, directed, and starred in this entire pathetic production all by yourself. That's when she lunged, not at Gareth this time, not at Darnell, at me. She hurled herself off the floor on that last wild surge of animal fury. I'll kill you. She shrieked, her face twisted into something I will never forget. I'll kill all of you. She didn't make it 2 steps. The heavy conference room doors, the ones Darnell had entered so dramatically, burst open again. This time, it wasn't a ghost. It was the Baltimore Police Department. 2 uniformed officers, hands already moving toward their sidearms, followed by a detective in a rumpled tan suit. They had been waiting in the hallway. They had heard everything. The first 2 officers cut Renee off mid-lunge. She fought them hard, running on pure adrenaline and hatred, twisting and kicking like a cornered animal. Get your hands off me, she screamed. You don't know who I am. I'm the victim here. Oh, I think we know exactly who you are, ma'am, the detective said. His voice had a gravelly weariness to it, like a man who had witnessed this same scene 1,000 times over. Tall, black, roughly my son's age. He didn't spare Renee so much as a glance as his officers brought her under control. He walked right past the screaming, thrashing woman and fixed his gaze on Gareth, who was still leaning against the wall, quietly working his torn shirt back into place. You too, the detective said, tilting his chin. Hands behind your back. Gareth raised his hands immediately, his expression one of practiced professional irritation. Wait, detective, hold on. You've got this wrong. I'm working with them. He jabbed a finger desperately toward me and Darnell. I'm a private investigator. The name's Gareth Colby P.I. out of Charlotte. I'm the one who pulled the evidence together. I'm on their side. The detective turned to me, one eyebrow climbing. I gave a single slow nod. He's telling the truth, detective, I said. Mr. Colby has been acting as my agent. He's the one who delivered the primary video evidence of the poisoning. He was essential to how this whole thing played out. The detective exhaled through his nose, looking Gareth over from the ripped shirt down to the fresh, bloody scratches marking his cheek. Well, Mr. Colby, he muttered, that's one hell of an investigative style. You can walk the detective through your methods down at the station. For now, you're a material witness. Don't leave this room. He swung his full attention back to Renee. The fight had drained out of her. She just stood there, pinned firmly between the two officers' chest-heaving eyes, boring straight into Darnell. You, she whispered, her voice soaked in venomous disbelief. You wouldn't do this to me, Darnell. Baby, please. After everything we've been. We're married. Darnell just looked at her. His face held nothing, no anger, no grief, no recognition. He was looking at a stranger, a dangerous one. A marriage, Renee, he said, his voice low and absolute, is a promise. You shattered it. You tried to kill it. You're not my wife. You're just a loose end. The detective unclipped his handcuffs. Renee, he said, his tone flat and procedural, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit first-degree murder and for the attempted murder of your husband, Darnell. He began reciting her rights. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be held against you in a court of law. The officers fastened her wrists behind her back. The metallic ratcheting click of the cuffs was the only sound in the room. It was sharp. It was final. It was the sound of the trap snapping shut. Let's move, the detective said, nodding toward the door. As the officers started walking her out, Renee looked back at me one last time. The hatred was gone from her eyes. What sat there now was just emptiness, dead and hollow. She had nothing left to hold on to. No money, no lover, no husband, no freedom. She was already a ghost, and she understood that. They walked her past me, this woman who had poisoned my son, this woman who had celebrated over his empty grave, this woman who had called me stupid and worthless, this woman who had tried to take everything I'd built. I let her get almost to the door. Renee, I said. My voice was easy conversational. She stopped. She didn't turn, but her shoulders pulled tight. She was listening. I stepped toward the conference room window, glancing down at the city street below. By the way, I said, my voice almost airy, that photo you posted from Cancun, the one in the coral red bikini, it was a beautiful shot. The water looked stunning. You looked so happy. I heard her draw in a sharp, ragged breath. I turned to look at her back as she stood cuffed between the two officers. I gave her my warmest, most fatherly smile. I just wanted to say, enjoy life while you still can. I sincerely hope you hold on to that feeling, because where you're headed, you won't be seeing the sun or a beach or a pina colada for at least the next 30 years. She made a sound, a choked, broken sob, and the officers pulled her out of the room. The mahogany doors swung closed, and silence settled back over us. It was done. Gareth the P. I finally peeled himself off the wall. He retrieved his jacket from the floor where it had landed when the chair went over. He shook it out and smoothed it flat, all business again, the consummate professional reasserting himself. He looked at me, then at Darnell, then at Yvette Drummond. One firm nod, sharp and clean, a gesture of respect. To me, Mr. Curtis, he said. Gareth, I replied, nodding back. Your fee will be wired first thing in the morning, with a significant bonus added. A real smile crossed his face this time. It was a genuine pleasure working with you, sir. A real pleasure. He turned toward the detective, who stood waiting by the door with his notebook already out. Detective, Gareth said, adjusting his cuffs, I expect you'll be wanting my full statement. You expect correctly, the detective muttered. Let's go. Gareth walked out, and then it was just the three of us, the three who had built and staged the entire performance. The heavy mahogany door clicked shut behind him, the sound of the detective's footsteps, and Gareth's faded off down the long, empty hallway. The electronic lock engaged with a quiet, definitive snick. And then, silence. The conference room, which only moments before had been a chaos of screams, confessions, and the spectacular, ugly collapse of a human life, was now perfectly, completely still. Just the three of us. the architects. Yvette Drummond was already at the head of the table. She was calmly, methodically sliding her legal pads and the digital voice recorder back into her slim leather briefcase. She clicked it shut. Her work here was finished. My son Darnell was still standing at the massive floor-to-ceiling window. His back was to the room. He was watching the flashing blue lights of the police cruiser below as it pulled away from the curb and vanished into the morning traffic of downtown Baltimore. He was watching the last piece of his old life, the toxic, rotten piece, being carried away. I gave him the moment. I let him watch until the lights were gone. I crossed to the cherrywood sideboard where a silver tray of ice water and an untouched coffee service had sat through the entire meeting. I poured myself a single glass of water. My hand was completely steady. The adrenaline of the confrontation, the cold fury I had kept locked in my chest for days, was finally pulling back. It didn't leave heat behind. It left something deep, quiet, and profound. Peace. The war was over. The trap had been sprung. We had won. I didn't hear Darnell move. He crossed the room without a sound and sank into one of the heavy black leather chairs at the table, not one of the side chairs. He settled into the one at the very head of the table, the seat of power. He didn't just sit. He collapsed into it, releasing a breath that seemed to have been stored not just through the last few days, but through 6 full months of living nightmare. He stared at the polished black surface of the table, at his own warped reflection for a long, silent moment. He looked spent, wrung out, but also, for the first time since I'd known him as a boy, completely unshackled. He looked up, not at me, but at Yvette, who was fastening the latches on her briefcase. "So," Darnell said, his voice quiet, hoarse, and rough. "It was all real, the $50 million. He shook his head, a small, disbelieving laugh slipping out. That wasn't just part of the trap. Yvette Drummond, a woman who had guarded my $50 million secrets for 20 years, looked at him steadily. Her face gave away nothing. "Mr. Curtis," she said, her voice crisp and precise, "does not bluff about money, Darnell. The $51.2 million was the audited liquid valuation as of 9 a.m. yesterday. It was the only element of this entire meeting that was not a complete fabrication." Darnell shook his head again slowly, the laugh fading away. He turned his gaze to me, and for the first time, he was truly seeing me. Not the grieving father from the funeral, not the quiet, comfortable retiree from the little brick house on the west side. He was seeing Curtis, the man who had built an empire from nothing and kept it hidden in plain sight. "All these years," he whispered. His voice was full of something close to awe. "All these years, in that little house, driving that old truck, arguing with Mom about the grocery budget." A watery, broken smile crossed his face. You were a millionaire, Dad. A millionaire 50 times over, and I never knew." He wasn't angry. He wasn't jealous. He was stunned. His entire life, his entire past, had just been recast through a new and impossible lens. I nodded. "Yes, son. I was." I walked over and took the chair beside him at the head of the long table. I set my glass of water down on the leather coaster. "Everything I did was for your protection. Everything I built alongside your mother, I guarded so you could stand on your own. A man who earned what he has, not some heir waiting on his inheritance. I never wanted you to coast in my shadow. I wanted your name to mean something you created yourself." I settled back into the chair. It held me well, but 72 years is a long time to carry a secret, Darnell. I met his eyes. The weight of concealing all of it had finally worn me through. I turned toward Yvette. She was on her feet, briefcase clasped, already angling toward the door. She stopped mid-step, head canting to one side. She could read me well enough to know the conversation wasn't over. She'd heard that particular register in my voice before. This was the one that meant business. "Yvette," I said. The father had left the room. What remained was the executive, the man whose signature moved fortunes. "Take your time leaving, but before you do, the trust structure changes as of right now." Not a flicker crossed her face. She lowered her briefcase, retrieved her secure tablet, and settled back into her seat. "Whenever you're ready, Curtis." "The Evelyn and Curtis Foundation Trust gets dissolved," I told her. Hearing those words aloud felt strange, like setting down something too heavy to name. "We're rebuilding from the ground up. $25 million, half the principal moves today. Whatever needs liquidating, liquidate it. I want it done before close of business." Darnell snapped upright beside me. "Dad, hold on!" I raised one hand, and he went quiet. My attention never wavered from Yvette. That 25 million, I continued, goes straight to the Children's Hospital Foundation of Baltimore. Unrestricted, anonymous. Let them break ground on a new wing. Let them use it to keep children alive. Something decent needs to grow out of all this rot. Yvette's stylus traced across the tablet without a word. Consider it done, she said. Something almost like warmth crossed her face, brief, rare. That's a significant decision, Curtis. Evelyn would have approved. Yes, I said simply. She would have. Now, the other 25 million. I turned to face my son. He was watching me, the way a man watches something he can't quite process the sheer scale of what was happening, the unhurried ease with which I was redirecting sums that could swallow entire neighborhoods whole. The remaining 25 million Yvette set it aside in a separate subtrust, the Darnell Trust. He's the sole beneficiary. I held my son's gaze. A quiet, firm smile found my face on its own. He'll need the cushion. There's a divorce ahead of him. I braced for the argument. I expected disbelief, pushback, maybe a flood of questions. Instead, after a long and stunned pause, Darnell broke into laughter. Not the easy kind, not relief finding an exit. This was something primal, a laugh dredged up from somewhere deep, carrying with it 6 months of dread and 25 years of buried truth, all of it bursting free at once. He laughed until his eyes ran. Dad? He got the word out eventually, pressing 2 fingers to the corner of his eye. His face had settled into something clear and open. I don't think the divorce is going to cost me that much. A small shake of the head. After what happened today, I don't imagine Renee is going to be negotiating terms from behind bars. Then the laughter drained away. He leaned in closer, elbows on the table. The awe hadn't left his expression, but it had company now. Something that had been absent for years. Decades, maybe. Pure respect between 2 men stripped of sentiment, the kind that has nothing to do with bloodlines. You saw through her, he said barely above a whisper, wonder threaded through every syllable. You figured out what she was before it ever registered with me. The whole performance, the funeral, the empty casket, Dr. Okafor Gareth. Dad. He exhaled, shaking his head with a slow, stunned smile. You are terrifying. I returned the smile. Terrifying is the wrong word, son, I said, rising from my seat. I pushed the chair neatly back under the table. I'm just methodical. My hand found his shoulder and rested there. Now let's leave this cold, overpriced room behind. I let my eyes sweep the space one final time, all sharp angles and hollow grandeur. Time to go home, the real one. 6 months have gone by since the trap closed. The Baltimore harbor sits dark and steady far below where I now stand. This is not the little brick house on the west side. This is home. Darnell talked me into the penthouse. Dad, he'd said that afternoon, still standing in that emptied conference room after the last officer had filed out. Enough. Stop performing the version of yourself you thought we needed. This is actually you. And he wasn't wrong. 3 decades in that small house, and I told myself it was humility. I told myself it kept him grounded, kept him safe. But the truth is simpler and less flattering. I was hiding. This space, all glass and air and steel soaring above the city, doesn't feel indulgent. It feels accurate. The old house enshrined my fear. The penthouse marks something else entirely, my victory, my honesty. I move through the rooms now, and they breathe. Light fills every corner. We brought pieces of Evelyn here. Her armchair sits beside the contemporary furniture, mismatched and somehow exactly right. Darnell has taken the east wing. The divorce is winding toward its conclusion. It's calm in here, orderly. After 12 months of poison and deception, I crave stillness, room to exhale. My son is unrecognizable from the man I pulled out of that nightmare. The 6 months have done their work on him, the way fire works on steel pressure and heat, and what comes out is harder, truer. The fear has left him, the constant second-guessing gone. He moves through the world now, like a man with somewhere to be, not the version of him. Renee slowly dismantled the one she coached into uncertainty. He's stopped looking at me the way children study their parents. He looks at me the way a partner does. We cleared out the old house together, 1 box at a time. It had the feeling of a burial, the right kind. We were lowering into the ground the fiction of the helpless old man Renee had counted on me being. She read me wrong from the first day. My son, though, finally has the full picture, and I'm only now beginning to truly see him. The house sold. I handed Mrs. Calderon, my neighbor of 4 decades, every dollar of the proceeds. Fix the roof, I told her. Go somewhere warm. The gratitude on her face that was worth something no dollar amount touches. Darnell ran the transaction. He was made for this kind of work. He takes to this new chapter the way he was always meant to. Trial never happened. The story didn't need a courtroom to detonate. The Cancun widow, a poisoning plot. It owned every news cycle for a solid month. Yvette Drummond laid the full case before the prosecutor's kitchen footage, the conference room recording of Gareth's confession bank statements, the fabricated death certificate. Renee's Guilford attorneys charged by the hour and read every page Yvette submitted. They understood what they were looking at. No path to acquittal. The only viable play was damage control. Because if that footage Darnell's own wife measuring 10 drops of poison into his coffee machine ever reached an open courtroom, she would spend the remainder of her years inside. So, she took the deal. Guilty plea conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. She begged the court for mercy she had never once extended to my son. The tears came freely this time, real ones, not theater. She cited the gambling debts. She named Gareth as the corrupting force. She described a single catastrophic lapse of judgment. The judge, someone I'd served alongside on a charity board, a woman who had watched her own son grow up in this city, studied Renee in silence, long enough that the room felt it. Then she sentenced her 30-year state penitentiary, no parole consideration, for 20. Gareth, having cooperated and testified, drew 7. He'll walk in 3. A rat who turns on the pack is still a rat. That settled the legal chapter. What remained was the money and the question of its proper place. Darnell's divorce closed within the month. Renee signed every paper presented to her from her cell. She had nothing left to argue with, and she understood her position exactly. The $25 million bearing his name was legally fully his. I kept watch. I gave him space. I turned the question over. Quietly, would the wealth that rotted his wife find a way to reach him too? 1 week passed. No new vehicle, no real estate transaction. He sat with it, thought through it. Then he walked into my penthouse office. A single sheet of paper came sliding across the desk toward me. "Dad," he said, "I do not want it. Every dollar, the full $25 million, signed back into the trust. One condition, though," he added. "This isn't your foundation anymore. It belongs to both of us, and we're not going to operate from a distance cutting checks and feeling generous. We're going to show up in person." So that's exactly what we did. The trust was rebuilt from scratch. We call it the Curtis and Darnell Foundation. And we are not just operating in Baltimore, we are fighting for Baltimore. The money I built in the shadows is now going to work out in the open. We are putting resources into community centers in the neighborhoods that got left behind. We are launching tech scholarships for kids on the West Side. Children like I once was, kids who just need one door to open for them. We are investing in the city that Renee and people like her only ever wanted to drain. We don't just mail the checks and move on, we show up. I was standing on a construction site in Sandtown, Winchester, just last week. Good shoes sunk in mud, and I cannot remember the last time I felt that alive, maybe 30 years ago. Darnell runs the day-to-day operations. He has discovered what he was made for. Software management was never the ceiling on this man. He is something else entirely now. He pushes contractors without mercy and sits with the families we're serving without impatience. He is every inch his mother's child. But he carries my iron underneath. That combination is something to behold. Which brings me to tonight. There's a chill in the air. The lights of the city spread across the dark below us like a field of embers. Darnell and I are out on the penthouse balcony together, looking out over the place we have committed ourselves to rebuilding. He passes me a glass. Water, just water. I haven't touched alcohol in 30 years. Neither has he. We stand there shoulder to shoulder, 2 men in expensive suits taking in the scope of everything still left to do. He doesn't say anything. I know where his mind is gone. He is thinking about her, about the years he cannot recover, about the life that was taken from him. She wrote me a letter. He says it quietly, still facing the horizon. From inside, I keep my gaze on the skyline. What did it say, I ask? The same things they always say. He shrugs. That she's sorry, that she was backed into a corner, that it was never supposed to go as far as it did, and that she still loves me. A short, dry sound escapes me. Love. A word she has never had the first understanding of. What did you do with it? Never opened it, Darnell says. He turns toward me. I handed it straight to Yvette. It goes into the file in case she ever pursues an appeal. I'm through carrying ghosts, Dad. I nod slowly. Good, that's the right call. We let the quiet sit between us for another moment. The wind up here has teeth. It cuts right through you. My eyes drift down to the city lights scattered below. I spent my entire life in hiding, son. My voice drops low. I concealed the money. I concealed what I was capable of. I convinced myself that if I made myself look small, the world would pass me over. I thought it was protection for you, for all of us. I let the words settle, and the regret that comes with them is sharp and familiar. But I had it wrong. I was a fool about it. Staying quiet doesn't shield anyone. It just clears space for the darkness to take root. It gives the predators a comfortable place to operate undisturbed. My silence, it came within reach of getting you killed. Darnell holds that for a long stretch without speaking. Then he turns and meets my eyes, his gaze steady and clear in the cold night. We're not staying quiet anymore, Dad. I look back at him, my son, my partner, my equal. No, I say. My eyes return to the city below, the dark streets waiting on the light, the work that remains, the dawn that's coming. We are not. And that's where we leave them. Two men on a balcony above Baltimore looking out over the city they chose to rebuild instead of abandon, not celebrating, just standing, steady, together. What this story cost Curtis was 30 years of silence, 30 years of carrying a secret so heavy it bent the shape of his family. What it taught him, I believe God was working through even the most painful parts of it, was that hiding your strength to keep the peace only leaves the people you love unguarded. The trap he laid for Renee didn't start the night Darnell called him. It started the moment Curtis decided he was done being underestimated. So here's what I want to leave with you. Don't let people mistake your quiet for weakness. The most dangerous person in the room is often the one who hasn't raised their voice yet. If someone is working against you, patience is a sharper weapon than anger. Gather what you need, then move. Protecting your family sometimes means making hard choices they won't understand until much later. Do it anyway. And never assume you know the full measure of the people who love you. Curtis was a millionaire 50 times over, driving an old truck and arguing about groceries. Never assume. This has been a family revenge story that I hope resonated with you, whether you're watching as someone who has ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or betrayed. For everyone in the adults 50+ community who knows what it means to have lived long enough to play the long game, this one was for you. If today's story moved, you leave a comment and tell me what you took from it. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't already, subscribe to Honor Revenge Stories so you don't miss what's coming next. Thank you for being here. I'll see you in the next one.